Order.
Okay. Sötkin dizege na hiwa haya chia sa huitu masionde da chike da doya holla se wa qade ya khis nezin khashala de nezin khashala tada ladut anezin hawe hunde Sötkin diz sakesi goyat shita tetkin saunde. To goyat shiwot atetin ne goin naunde. Hani konezi khashala de sötkin. De kan sorun kaysinda. Hani goyat shige got hayake hunda desinda hani hayat shita hunde da. Wow, der kann die Heizung heißt ja nicht, ich hayati. Yatha yadanizche wazitat yehondende Gothayak ehonada kolanizide gatet ininde ninkai wone wonde Yakenete koi kedine kesinete koine Wadaten tante dadite gandi dagtana dikene sa degna unile Watlin se wonta kone diyosan smolana tiehoteninde Yatha yachi yadanizche wazitat yehondende Sanotimasi and the Marimasi.
Please be seated. Thank you. I'd like to thank Elder Lafferty for the opening prayer and reflections. Colleagues, before we get into our business today, we have some special guests up in our audience, the 2025 Ontario Legislator Internship Program participants, and some of you had the opportunity to meet with them. And these are pretty amazing young people that have given us this opportunity to come here and see our great government work, how consensus government works. So I'd like to recognize them, and if I butcher their names, I told them on Monday and I said it on Tuesday. I apologize now, but we'll just go from there. Madeline Ritter, or Maddie, Annie Dahl, James Louis, Megan Ryan Lloyd, Nikita Lennox, Alex Sultan, Saida Jafar, Aisha Ali, Caitlin Saha. I apologize for that one. That one's even worse than the other. So I'd like to welcome you to our assembly and hope you're enjoying yourself and you've taken a different path instead of the one you normally did and see the whole beautiful city of Yellowknife. So welcome here. Minister statements. Minister for Education. No, let's try environment and climate change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand today to highlight one of the most significant achievements of 2024, the finalization of the Our Land for the Future Agreement, formerly called the NWT Project Finance for Permanence Agreement. This landmark initiative is a monumental achievement for Indigenous peoples in the Northwest Territories, fostering Indigenous-led conservation, stewardship, and economic development. The GNWT had the honor of supporting this transformative initiative in partnership with 23 Indigenous governments, the Government of Canada, and private donors. Through the process of finalizing the agreement, the GNWT worked closely with Indigenous governments, NGOs, industry leaders, and local communities. Extensive consultations ensured that this initiative aligns with Indigenous priorities and balances conservation efforts with the community economic opportunities. Not only is our Land for the Future a testament to the strength and true collaboration, but also a clear example of what can be accomplished when members of the Legislative Assembly unite behind a common goal. Mr. Speaker, as we all can remember, advancing this agreement required substantial effort to develop new legislation, enabling the creation of a trust. I am proud that the members came together to move this critical legislation forward at an accelerated pace, ensuring that the benefits of the agreement could be realized as quickly as possible. This achievement highlights our shared commitment to working with Indigenous governments to do what is best for the NWT residents and communities. The funding, $300 million from the Government of Canada and $75 million from private donors, will facilitate the establishment of Indigenous protected and conserved areas, Indigenous guardian programs, and climate resilience and tourism projects. Mr. Speaker, the benefits will be transformative. Our Land for the Future will create jobs in small communities across the NWT while promoting sustainable stewardship of NWT lands and resources. Investments in Indigenous-led conservation efforts will enhance community health and well-being for future generations, contributing to cultural continuity in the territory. Implementation is already underway, with funding anticipated to flow in mid-2025. The GNWT will continue to collaborate with Indigenous governments, industry, and stakeholders to ensure that the benefits of this agreement reach all NWT residents. This achievement brings the Government of the Northwest Territories closer to fulfilling its mandate commitment to enhance reconciliation while supporting sustainable economic development and environmental stewardship in the territory. It is a monumental accomplishment for Indigenous peoples, and the GNWT is honored to be part of it. Together, we will work to create opportunities for Northerners that will ensure a prosperous and sustainable future for all NWT residents. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Minister statements, member statements, member from Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I was speaking about the Polytechnic transition and wasn't able to fully finish out my thoughts, and I wanted to share those today. Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear that when I'm advocating for the Polytechnic transition, I am not advocating for something that would be a zero-sum game, where some communities lose, one community gains. That is a restrictive vision, and I'm tired of it going around, because what I want to advocate for is something expansive. This is not about concentrating resources in one community, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I think of an expansive vision of the college, I think of something like establishing an ENRTP program, which they've talked about doing and which I'm a graduate of, one that would bring students into various communities in the territory. Imagine that program bringing students up to Inuvik for a year and having them work on high Arctic research with whales, with the ocean, with things like that, and then moving around to different communities, working with elders, working in different ways. Mr. Speaker, imagine a governance program that did something similar, a governance program which taught students about the various different governance models being established in the Northwest Territories and embedded them in those systems. A program which brought students into the communities and had them working with people who are doing the work of implementing governance right now. That would be a very exciting and attractive program. I think of students graduating from a program like that, the employability that they would have. This is the kind of programming that I think people would come from around the world to experience. And when we think about our community governments, they are constantly coming to us and talking about capacity building. Imagine a program that embedded graduates and embedded students in these governments and helped them work with that capacity building and help them work with that government. I think that's something that students from this territory could get very excited about. It would prepare them for careers in these governments. That's the kind of thing that we need to be doing. I think it would be very exciting, Mr. Speaker, and I hope we get on with it. Mr. Speaker, I do want to highlight the fact that Yellowknife's campus is inadequate, and I want us to seek funding to improve it. That was clearly laid out in the facilities master plan, and I think we need to go through with that, but it's not about taking from someone else and giving to another. Look at this situation we're in with the CLCs. We need programming that works for the communities too. We have to be thinking about everybody when we're thinking about a vision for the college. I think it's clear, and it was clear in the foundational review, that the college as it is not working for the best interests of the whole territory. The vision that I want to work for and what I want to change is that narrative itself. So let's get together, let's do expansive visioning for this program, for this college, and let's get a polytechnic university that we can all be proud of. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Frame Lake. Member statements. Member from Range Lake.
Mr. Speaker, perception is everything. How we view the world around us determines how we live our lives. Our perception of the challenges and opportunities we face every day informs our actions and thus plays a major role in each situation's outcome. Many Northerners face challenges in which often the last resort they approach the GNWT for solutions. In tough times, there's already a feeling of desperation. So the perception that these services are difficult to access can be a serious detriment to whether or not a service actually reaches the person it's intended for. Unfortunately, the often Byzantine nature of our departments can make these services appear out of reach, high aloft, separate, confusing towers of bureaucracy that must be scaled through confusing applications, intimidating policies, and frantic searches for the relevant staff. This is precisely how government silos make delivery of vital services difficult, especially when the trickiest situations call for access to multiple programs which exist across different departments. Honorable members have all worked with constituents facing these tough times who feel frustrated because they perceive the solutions are as obscured behind unnecessarily complicated barriers. They may need access to public housing, social services, income assistance, or to be connected to an NGO in their community. But the policies, programs, and paperwork seem too overwhelming, and sadly our constituents may not get the help they need on time. Thankfully, our government has created the Office of Integrated Service Delivery. This was created to specialize in breaking down departmental barriers and provide resources and knowledge in services offered by both government and non-government organizations. This is a tool I referred Range Lakers to when complicated constituency files require more support. Very rarely do constituents come back from the Integrated Services Unit without the support they needed, broken down for them in easy-to-follow strategies. Even when a constituent does not meet the threshold for ISD, staff were more than happy to provide some quick, crucial advice or a package of programs and applications that would have otherwise taken much effort to gather. Let's all celebrate the innovative nature of this office and all the hard work staff there do to ensure the services each department works hard maintaining are wildly accessible to those who need them. The success of this unit here in Yellowknife is a model for the entire territory, and I hope we will see more of it in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, member from Range Lake. Member from Wolfie.
Mr. Speaker, I'll do this in my language for the opening comment, for the opening of the statement. Mr. Speaker, indeed, Zata, Ontako, Gunek Eyagolahi, Hazia Lahi, Ontako Golahi, what's the date? Program Hanimuta would dagelagidi, Honda thought home. Mr. Speaker, Gunek as a Kanaget de Gigats at Ehunte. Gahin Gigana Hots at the Leninde, Amegorana hot there. Intergetani de Gihe Hunzia with debts in one, Diho Giguna nets in Deninde, Sakha Gaze. What a good said Salami. Inta Geheda good out at Ursula. Inta Gutla hunt a good that's a get Dara hunter. It I hunt in now, wo ka tsadese ka hi go ga tsatle di go ga sunile inta go ga na gunne ke tsetininde zula go tenile na asihlun ko tsunle ita sakhahlun gya go tsadi wo ke tsaso sakhahlun tsi ode haniko giguna datseta onile na ekats wo now Dani, what I say, what inta geda, what did di, edda get dera, gigana hots at dera hunte. Eat a cat or yet he, Sakagiga ninde, gahin digorats at ilesakagirats at it, what I cats or hanigora yet he or gahizo hanigots at dele. Dick, do not take our dedi hanigo get de hunte. Mr. Speaker, I'll do it in English now. A few days ago, last week, in response to questions about the closure of the Community Learning Center, the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment mentioned a GNWT in What We Heard report and the 2024 facility report. Mr. Speaker, we can see from these reports that learning centers are at the heart of college programming in small communities. Of the 19 centers being closed, the facility report notes that 12 standalone CLC facilities were constructed between 1967 and 2011 and are in various states of repair. 7 CLC centers share space in GNWT-owned or community facilities. This is the case for the Wati Center, which is located within Minzi Community School. Mr. Speaker, can I have unanimous consent to conclude my statement?
Member from Moultrie. Member from Moultrie is asking for unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Seeing no nays, you may conclude your statement, member.
Okay, 30 seconds. Okay, Mr. Speaker. According to the What We Heard report published in April 2024, awareness of CLC program is currently perceived as low, but the report states partnering with local governments will strengthen the presence of Aurora College in communities. The CLC are currently run by full-time community adult educators as well, visiting instructors who deliver short courses and workshops. Mr. Speaker, instructors in small communities can direct our youth towards trades and professionals. We need more specialized programming like training for the office workers and apprenticeship. I will have a question for the Minister of ECE at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, member from Moultrie. Member statements. Member from Sawtooth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Norman Wells oil field resource revenues. Mr. Speaker, the Norman Wells oil field celebrated its century anniversary 2021. Mr. Speaker, this legacy oil field is unique in many ways within the industry. The resource is of high quality, sweet, light crude with low viscosity and low refining costs. Mr. Speaker, another unique view or perspective is the ownership structure. The federal government retains or owns the subsurface rights, and with a joint operating agreement with Imperial Oil, retains 2/3. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to the NWT Land and Resource Devolution Agreement, the Norman Wells proven area remains under federal jurisdiction. Mr. Speaker, the resource revenues are significant, over $2 billion over 40 years. This structure, Mr. Speaker, opens the doors for closure and reclamation opportunities. Mr. Speaker, my office authored NORTRAN, a training readiness plan for remediation and reclamation. Mr. Speaker, the Sawtooth region is filled with remediation sites. And, Mr. Speaker, combining our efforts to address the trades workforce shortages through a design-build approach for a new trades training tech school in Norman Wells is not only innovative, but realistic. On approaching our federal counterparts to redirect resource revenues to the O&M of Nortran. Later, Mr. Speaker, I will have questions to the appropriate minister. Masi.
Member from the South 2. Member statements. Member from the Decho.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Du la tani magiunte. Onda kage di nezu de kining di nezu kaina a and nezu shehe halaitsenta. Kutsa kwenets and there na kwen nezu kining di. Merci, Mr. Speaker. Today I would like to talk about housing support for residents in the Decho. Mr. Speaker, I'm worried about the communities in my riding. Enterprise residents should not feel abandoned by this government as they look for solutions after losing their homes during the 2023 wildfire. Many of them are currently living in Hay River, wondering when they can move back home. I have heard from other constituents in housing in Decho communities who have received eviction notices during the winter. Mr. Speaker, according to the Rental Office Annual Report for 23-24, the number of eviction orders issued decreased by 39.6%. Even though eviction rates went down, people are still being evicted. I want to know why these evictions are happening now during the winter months. Many of these people have arrears, but they're willing to pay to stay in their home. I want to know how we can help these people. The NWT rental office must hold hearings with landlords and tenants before determining an eviction order should be made. I want to ensure residents in small communities have a voice. Mr. Speaker, I've heard from constituents in NWT housing who have lost their jobs or who have taken on a caregiver role for family members and their rents have not been reduced. The cost of living is getting higher. It is becoming harder and harder to find solutions, and we need to work together to help these constituents, residents of the NWT. I will have questions for the Minister of Housing at the appropriate time, Mr. Speaker. Merci.
Thank you, member from the Decho. Member statements. Member from Tuna Day Willity.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. In 2023, the 19th Assembly passed Bill 85, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People Implementation Act. I was here when this happened, Mr. Speaker. It was a momentum occasion that promised to be very beneficial to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit governments across the North. The UNDRIP Declaration provides a framework for reconciliation, healing, and peace. It reaffirms the right of Indigenous people recognizes the Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution. After that vote in the previous Assembly, work must be done to factor this declaration into all decisions. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission highlighted this in their calls to action on as well. Mr. Speaker, all MLAs in this House made an oath to honor and respect the treaty signed with Indigenous people when they took office. The treaties were always the law of the land. They backed up by international legal standards, which were reaffirmed through in this chamber. Furthermore, Indigenous governments and organizations across the territory have also signed the NWT Council Leadership Memorandum of Understanding, so we could have a meaningful way to measure true reconciliation. It was reported on Thursday that the government of the Northwest Territories is expected to spend $2.5 billion in 2025-2026. The majority of that money will come from the federal government of Canada transfer. For every dollar in the federal transfer, it works out to 76 cents from the Crown of Indigenous and Northern Affairs. Mr. Speaker, more than 50% of our population is Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit, and yet the GNWT does not consult with Indigenous governments about how to use that money they receive from the federal government, even though much of the transfer to the GNWT is supposed to fund their services. Therefore, the GNWT budget still fails treaty rights by refusing to recognize the intent of these transfers and ignores the duties to consult Indigenous governments on how these funds should be spent. And in contravention of UNDRIP, according to the Action Plan Committee 2024 annual report, an action plan has still not been published, and the implementation of UNDRIP remains unfinished. This continued lack of consultation. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my member statement.
The member from Trinidad is seeking unanimous consent to conclude his statement. Seeing no nays, you may conclude your statement.
Thank you, members. According to the Action Plan Committee of 2024 annual report, an action plan that has still not been published and remains unfinished. This continued lack of consultation persists in many other ways, such as through the scrapping of the affirmative action policy without asking the Indigenous governments, and Aurora College closing 19 community learning centers in the Indigenous communities, which will come as a total surprise. I will have questions for the Minister at the appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Member from Trinidad. Member statements. Member from Nunavut Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know the members have heard me speak of this topic several times in this House. I know the previous MLA for Nunavut has brought it up as well, and that's the state of the Nunavut Bypass Road, Mr. Speaker, in the Nunavut. This is the final extension of the Dempster Highway, used by trucks, but not only used by heavy equipment and vehicles coming into the community, Mr. Speaker. It's also used, people use it for walks, they use it for recreation, the schools use it for their running clubs, it's used for a lot of different things in the community, Mr. Speaker. Safety is also an issue there, Mr. Speaker, with vehicles coming through there on a regular basis, both for the vehicles and for the pedestrians that walk on it. And, Mr. Speaker, not to mention the dust that it causes in the community all summer long. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm hoping with the completion of the Nunavut runway expansion, and I know the next phase, Mr. Speaker, is to have that runway paved. That project, by the way, which was done on time and on budget and provided economic benefit to both Indigenous governments in Nunavut. So I'm hoping, Mr. Speaker, when we do that paving of that runway, that then the department will also consider finally paving the Nunavut Bypass Road, Mr. Speaker. And the Nunavut Bypass Road is an arterial class highway under the highway designation and classification regulations. So, Mr. Speaker, I will hopefully only have one question for the Minister of Infrastructure this afternoon. Thank you.
Member from Nunavut Lake. Member statements. Member from Yellowknife North.
Mr. Speaker, I want to speak today about the Stanton P3 project, the biggest infrastructure project the GNWT has ever undertaken, now estimated to cost at least $1.2 billion. I'm not here to just wag my finger. I want to focus on the value of government publicly admitting its mistakes, which we are often so afraid to do. If this government wants us to take seriously its ambitions to build 3 new multi-billion-dollar mega projects, including highways and the Tulsan expansion, it needs to address head-on what went wrong with the Stanton P3. It's so obviously absurd that we are now subleasing from a private company a building that we still own at a cost of $78 million over 30 years. By refusing to consider the Xiwe-Guati building as part of the P3 project, the government is refusing to report publicly on the sublease, which frankly only adds to the scandal instead of shielding the government from it. When the lease was signed with Ventura in 2016, the government didn't analyze the value of just keeping the building. It was well known as early as 2014 that the government needed more space for healthcare services. So of course it raises eyebrows when only a year after signing the lease, we leased the building right back. We still don't even know how that decision was made, who made it, whether the person who signed the sublease even had the authority to sign it. Who or what are we protecting by refusing to acknowledge mistakes? The legacy of this trail of irresponsible decision-making is found all over this budget that's before us. It's a huge part of our interest payments and debt that has us bumping up against our debt ceiling. It would be one thing if the new Stanton building and the Xiwe-Guati building were running smoothly, but both buildings have been plagued with serious plumbing, heating, wastewater, and mold issues. We have entire wings of the cavernous new hospital, as well as wings of Xiwe-Guati, sitting empty because we don't have the staff or resources to use them. Now, ideally, we would unshackle ourselves from this 30-year payout to Ventura. However, there was indication from the Infrastructure Deputy Minister during the public briefing that there might be no exit mechanism in the lease. That too needs to be become part of the public reckoning on this issue. I ask this government, Mr. Speaker, to earn our confidence by fully admitting its mistakes. Thank you.
Thank you, member from Yellowknife North. Member statements. Member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to speak to some of the challenges of consensus government today, somewhat of the fundamental lacks or concerns I'm seeing. In my 14th year, I've personally never seen, or I want to stress, or felt it being so ineffective or paternalistic in many ways. And again, I'm saying I've seen and I've felt. Mr. Speaker, when I watch 2/3 of members want to support something and it seems to paralyze members or the Assembly to the point it has to be watered down so far it becomes meaningless, it questions what value do members at large present here. Mr. Speaker, we can all get behind motherhood issues or big cause issues. I mean, it's like saying who would be in favor of cancer? Of course, no one. It's easy to get behind those things. But when we want to talk about tough issues, government issues, legislative issues, we seem to be paralyzed. And it's always us against them. Mr. Speaker, when the government brings forward its budget that's 99% done, and then they ask us, what do you think? By the way, it's printed and ready to be handed out. It's not here for consultation. It's more of a drive-by just to answer a clarification, a few questions here or there. So when the government says we're cutting $150 million out of the budget over 3 years, it's more of a, this is what we're doing, as opposed to what do you think? I mean, Mr. Speaker, when they expand the debt wall, they don't come to members and say, this is how much we're asking for and this is why. We've expanded the debt wall and we're asking for it, that's all you get. Mr. Speaker, there are many examples of this when you're in a member side of the House that you just get told how things are going to be. Mr. Speaker, 12 ridings are not represented in cabinet. That's 63% of northern voices go silent, and we constantly have to be relentless trying to get the attention of the government. When the Premier wannabes asked me a question about what would I like to see in this coming Assembly, I was elated by the opportunity to express what my experience has seen. And one of the fundamental things I asked for was not about I want a road, I want a plane, I want any of those stuff. I said, and I meant this, members want to be heard. Members want to feel relevant. When members have issues in their ridings, they want to feel that they are being recognized, appreciated, and we hear from the government things like, we'll see what we can do. We'll see what we can work. But when I asked a question last week about maybe we should talk about an issue, we get a dismissal from the Premier saying, nope, not interested. And that's not how consensus government was supposed to work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Yellowknife Centre. Member statements. Good afternoon, colleagues. Today I'm going to recognize another long-serving member of the public, Mr. Gary Showerty. Some of you have known him as the younger brother to Doug Showerty, a former clerk of this House. I realize that I'm not going to get everything said in the next 2.5 minutes about him, so I'm just going to start. Gary started his career with the JNWT way back in 1987, where he worked for the Department of Personnel for the summer. Following the summer job, Gary worked for the Department of Lands, where he spent 10 years, during which time he also completed his Keysthonology degree through Mount Royal College, while continuing to work full-time for the GNWT. In true Gary fashion, he had a goal to work with Municipal and Community Affairs, Sport and Rec Division, and he pursued his Keysthonology degree was deliberate. His hard work paid off in 1997 when, following graduation, Gary began his time with the Sport and Rec Division. This is where I got to know him. Unfortunately, he was a new kid on the block, and before you knew it, his nickname was the Rookie, even though he spent 10 years in the government experience under his belt. After 5 years in the Sport Recreation Division as an advisor, Gary assumed the manager's role. He was the manager role where Gary supported several projects and programs which continue to have positive impacts on residents of the Northwest Territories. Some of these include the Dene and Inuit Game Culture Coaching Resources, the 2019 Western Canada Lottery Act, and 2010 Olympic and Paralympic projects, and the Youth Ambassadors Program. Although there are many notable memories of his time in the Sport and Rec Youth Division, attending the 2010 Winter Olympic and Paralympics in Vancouver as part of the Canadian Northern House was a highlight. Through his career, the NWT proudly offered daily demonstrations of Arctic sport and Dene games which drew large crowds and long lineups of people who wanted to to enter the Canadian House, Northern House to watch. Shortly after returning from the Olympics, Gary started to show an interest in pursuing new opportunities and Director of Corporate Affairs at the time, convincing Gary to take on the manager's apology position. Being respectful of time, I'd like the next part of my statement to be deemed as read and printed in the Hansard. Colleagues, I'd like to thank Gary for his time for the residents. He's done a great job. Thank you very much. Arj. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Member from Decho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is there a policy to avoid issuing eviction orders for housing clients during the winter months? This is for the Minister of Housing. Thank you.
Thank you, member from Decho. Minister responsible for Housing and NWT.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is no policy to not have evictions in the winter months. The Minister or Housing and NWT could consider compassionate grounds, but it depends on the circumstance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister responsible for Housing and NWT. Member from Decho.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister advise how many evictions are served during the winter months? Thank you.
Member from the Decho. Minister for Housing and NWT.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That would depend year to year. Over this last year, I believe we've had 10 eviction orders issued over the winter months. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister responsible for Housing and NWT. Final supplementary. Member from the Decho.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister say how many hearing rental officers held with Decho tenants in 24-25 before these eviction orders were issued? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Merci.
The Decho. Minister responsible for Housing and NWT.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have that number for the member today. I couldn't provide that information, and also look it up on the rental officer site as well. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister responsible for Housing and NWT. Oral questions. Member from Nunavut Boot Lake. One question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, it's been a day, so I'm going to lob one over the plate from my honourable colleague across the way, the Minister of Infrastructure, so she can knock it out of the park, Mr. Speaker. Will she commit to paving the Inuvik Bypass Road during the completion of the Inuvik-Rumba expansion? Thank you.
Member from Nunavut Boot Lake. Real easy one. Minister of Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, again, I am happy to be able to report as soon as we are paving that runway, we will be chip sealing this portion of the Inuvik Bypass Road. Thank you.
Members, oral questions. Nunavut Boot Lake, I guess you got your one question. You're good, right? Okay. Oral questions. Member from Slave Lake. Slave Lake.
I'm not from Alberta, but thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm committed to reminding the government to listen and act accordingly on what they hear from the residents of the NWT. So during their public engagement, many thoughtful and detailed ideas were shared with members as well as government on ECC's draft climate action plan. Most concerning to me is an overwhelming groundswell of feedback requesting clear, plain language and direct, tangible actions. So to the Minister, I recognize that there will be a What We Heard document coming out in the near future, but can the Minister highlight at a high level what his areas of interest for changes are after reading all of the feedback? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Getting this right. Member from Great Slave. Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much to the member for the question. As she said, there was a tremendous amount of engagement on this topic, and we extended the time frame and continued to accept long-form submissions well into January. Throughout the process, we had 128 participants at a climate change advisory group gathering. We engaged with Indigenous governments, organizations, community governments, youth researchers, land users, industries, other partners. We had 44 residents engaged through a public engagement on the website, and 2 Indigenous governments and 6 non-government organizations also provided long-form information. So from my personal perspective, resilience, ensuring that we have proper knowledge into this process, and that we're working to provide every option that we can to assist in the target for net zero by 2050 is certainly high on the mandate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Minister for that. I'm glad he took the time to review all of that feedback. Can the Minister outline if the next iteration of the draft, or I guess the next climate change action plan, will take the concerns of plain language seriously, and how is the department working to address and incorporate feedback on this particular issue? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Great Slave, Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the importance of plain language was a theme of what we heard in engagement throughout. This is very important feedback for us, and that we're considering the changes and improvements to the planned climate actions. We take this responsibility to communicate with the public in a clear, concise manner that everyone can understand very seriously. And to that end, already through the engagement process, we have taken some opportunities to change how we were doing things, and the department worked closely with the local graphic artists to create some broadly accessible visual presentations that were used throughout engagement. And this is just the first step of how we will make change going forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Final supplementary, member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that. And I think graphic representations of conversations is a fantastic way to bring everybody in. But, the other big theme I heard, and I know the minister saw, was that, especially from youth, there's a lot of climate anxiety right now. So can the minister explain what bold action he wants to see in his action plan that will address the concerns he's heard, especially of our youth? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
From Great Slave, Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a topic that's close to my heart, ensuring that we are engaging with our youth across the NWT. I have grandchildren that are going to be coming along here into this environment soon. And, I'm encouraged by the participation that we had. We had the NWT Climate Change Youth Council participate in a forum in October. Ecology North facilitated discussions with a total of 190 students here in Yellowknife. MLA Morgan and myself are planning an engagement with high school students later in the month here in Yellowknife to discuss the issue, to listen to their concerns and their issues. And I think, as a department and from my position as minister, addressing the anxiety and the uncertainty of the changing climate with the youth in the Northwest Territories is a very high priority. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Oral questions. Member from Mophly.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with CLC closing, can the minister commit to discussing partnership opportunities for apprenticeship and other programs with Indigenous government and community organizations to strengthen the presence of Aurora College in small communities? Thank you.
Member from Mophly, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to say that meeting with Indigenous governments is something that Cabinet does often, and education always shows up on the agendas for those meetings. In addition, I meet with the development corporations that are associated with our Indigenous governments and have met with the Clecho Investment Corporation just recently as well, and are having conversations about this very thing. I'm doing those conversations in my role as Minister of Education, not through Aurora College, but certainly would want to invite the member to work with the college to invite them into the community as well, and to encourage those conversations to continue. So ultimately, Mr. Speaker, my answer is yes, from the perspective of Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Member for Moultrie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Community learning centers are currently staffed by full-time community adult educators as well as visiting instructors. Can the minister explain what will happen to these jobs once the centers close? Thank you.
Member for Moultrie. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Aurora College is currently working with the Department of Finance to help affected employees work through the staffing process and work through what comes next for them, including looking at lists of available positions within the GNWT. So I can confirm that Aurora College is working closely with the Department of Finance on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Member for Moultrie.
Mr. Speaker, 7 CLCs share space in GNWT-owned or community facilities. And for example, there is no formal lease agreement between Minzi Community School in Wati and Aurora College. Can the minister explain what will happen to these spaces in June? Thank you.
Member for Moultrie. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can't comment on what is going to happen exactly with each one of those spaces right now, but I think it's important that we're creative and flexible in what this looks like going forward. Where there are facilities that are leased by the GNWT, those facilities would go back to the owner. And where the infrastructure is owned by the GNWT, I can say that there has already been outreach by either NGOs within communities or some Indigenous governments who have said, hey, we have a different thing that we would like to see that community learning centre used for. And so I think it's really important to hear communities out and to work with Indigenous governments and also work through the Department of Infrastructure's asset management policies of what happens to assets when they're no longer used by the GNWT. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Oral questions. Member from Sawtooth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today my question is a follow-up on the options available for approaching funding to challenge trades in the demands in our workforce. My question is to the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Can the Minister agree to the publication of Nortran as I referenced in previous correspondence and in my statement? Thank you.
Thank you, member from Sawtooth. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the member is asking for the publication of it, I think that tabling it here in the House is a great way to make sure that all of our colleagues can see it and the member can share his hard work on that. And I look forward to continuing conversations about Nortran with the member. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Member from Sawtooth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to bring to the attention of the Minister during my lobby efforts, we, the Sawtooth, have secured a contribution of $7,000 from industry for the publication. My next question is, can the Minister share what supports are in place for this training readiness publication? Supports in terms of funding, etc. Thank you.
Sawtooth, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I spoke to yesterday about the different training opportunities that ECE does have, there are supports for businesses or employers rather, and also Indigenous governments and community organizations that would like to deliver training and on-the-job supports for staff. There's also wage subsidies that are available to staff as well, and certainly through a program like this, those subsidies would still be available as well. Thank you.
Education, Culture, and Employment. Final supplementary. Member from Sawtooth.
Final. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the Minister for that information here. That all goes towards what supports are behind this plan. Can the Minister, in consultation with Cabinet colleagues for the federal engagement, ask or reply on whether there's a joint initiative that can be supported by this government for the federal ownership of accessing and redirecting resource revenues from the Norman Wells oil field towards Nortran? Thank you.
From the Sawtooth, Minister, Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I believe in the member's statement he referenced legacy royalties from the site. The GNWT certainly would not be in a position to ask for those back. And then, however, Indigenous governments certainly could have their own conversations and bilaterals with the federal government. In terms of federal engagement, certainly the government does have a federal engagement strategy and has identified key infrastructure projects as of what they are going to the federal government and advocating for. When it comes to our FTP tables, our federal, territorial, provincial tables that we all sit at as ministers, we certainly work with our province and territorial colleagues in order to advocate for additional funding, and advocating for additional labour market funding is something that I do on a regular basis. So in that respect, yes. Thank you.
Minister from Education, Culture, and Employment. Oral questions. Member from Trinidad-Willity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as mentioned earlier, in the 19th Assembly, we worked on the Bill 85, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People Act. We spent a lot of time on it. We came up with a report and we submitted in the House. However, Mr. Speaker, right after it was implemented, the NWT Council of Leaders, through a memorandum of understanding, put forward an agreement that was signed by those Aboriginal governments. Right now, Mr. Speaker, I just want to ask the question to the Deputy Premier. Can you let the House know on what's happening with the United Nations UNDRIP document with Indigenous governments? Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Trinidad-Willity. Madam Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is an action plan that is underway. I understand that there is a target date of the fall of 2025 to have that action plan published, and that work towards that is indeed on track. Departments are all contributing to it, working with participating Indigenous governments toward that. Thank you.
Or no, sorry, Madam Deputy Premier. Member from Trinidad-Willity.
Geez, you took my next question away. Now that you just announced that it's going to be released in 2025, this plan, how is it going to roll out? Is this working with Indigenous governments? Can you just update the House on this? Thank you.
From Trinidad-Willity. Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to presuppose the work of the committee with respect to how the action plan is being formed and what it will contain or its detail. There is a lot of work happening across departments. We are all contributing to being part of the work on behalf of the GNWT as being just one member at that table. So, Mr. Speaker, and I don't want to also to take away from the fact that the GNWT has bilateral agreements with multiple Indigenous governments, and that we also sit at Council of Leaders and at IGCS. So there's a great deal of integration within the Northwest Territories between this government and that of Indigenous governments, and we'll certainly continue to see that as it goes forward, both this as well as then looking forward to see what the action plan ultimately contains. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Premier. Final supplementary. Member from Trinidad-Willity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the 2025-26 budget. I went through it, and I'd just like to know what the Deputy Premier has planned to implement UNDRIP when I didn't see no money in the budget. Can she explain as to how we're going to move forward? Thank you.
Member from Trinidad-Willowdale. Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the work of implementing and respecting UNDRIP and treaties is part of the day-to-day work that happens across every department and is the responsibility of every single minister at all times. Mr. Speaker, there doesn't need to be a new line item or new money to be reflective of the honour and the oath that we've all taken, nor of the role of every government or every department vis-a-vis each community and each Indigenous government. And Mr. Speaker, the example I'll give is frankly the work of the GNWT on the Action Committee in order to see that we are delivering on 2025 as being the action plan. That work is happening with the budgets that are proposed for Executive and Indigenous Affairs as the lead, but also with every other department that they have folks and staff available to contribute to it. Thank you.
Deputy Premier. Oral questions. Member from Yonley Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's probably rare I get to make a statement like this. I'm sure we will all agree in this House that healthcare dollars are precious. It's very difficult to find agreement on anything some days, but I think we might be able to agree on that. Mr. Speaker, the questions I'll be raising today are to the Healthcare Minister, clearly, regarding the security of healthcare cards. And that's always been something of interest of mine, because if I recall, during one of my previous assemblies, we had more healthcare cards out there than citizens. What an interesting paradox it was at that time. So, Mr. Speaker, my question specific to the Minister of Health is she aware of how many healthcare cards we have out there, and does that number relate to the number of citizens we have in the Northwest Territories? Thank you.
From Yonley Centre. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question. You know, my very first job after high school was a healthcare card registration specialist. And one of the things my colleague taught me is that we have a lot of people that we have to be doing investigations on that are outside of the territory. So that probably speaks to the time when the member was in the House, that we started to change the way that we provide healthcare cards, and now they actually have an expiry date. So when you renew your healthcare card, you have to have an NWT address. Before, they never had expiry dates. But I do not have the detail of how many people that we have as residents right now offhand, and how many cards we have out there, but I am sure that I can get that data for the member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services. Member from Yonley Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll take the Minister on their offer of how we know and how we know. So, Mr. Speaker, other jurisdictions place healthcare dollars so high on their list, they actually make healthcare cards also an identity card. So in other words, their pictures on their healthcare card. And places such as Ontario, BC, and Quebec do this to ensure the quality of the healthcare is going to the right people. They can guarantee the number with the person. So, Mr. Speaker, my specific question is this: is this an initiative that the Department of Health can take on to, again, protect the precious northern healthcare dollars? Thank you.
From Yonley Centre. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and it's, you know, I find that question, it was just a couple of weeks ago that I was having this conversation, because renewal is up this year for healthcare cards, and on our healthcare cards, they are very plain. They have an expiry date and they have our name. And so that was the question that I asked my staff to go back to the department to say, how do we work with infrastructure? You know, we have this struggle right now in our communities, whereas a lot of people are looking for identification cards. How do we work together to provide identification cards, have that information, the picture, so it's the right person with the card? So that I just tasked my staff to kind of look at options on where we are with all that kind of information, and is that something that we can do, and what is that going to cost us? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services. Final supplementary. Member from Yonley Centre.
Well, it's funny because I get, that's the right phrase, I don't want to say targeted, but I get targeted, I'll say it anyway, I get targeted for not giving my questions to the minister or advancing that stuff, but yet she scooped my last question. So So good on her for being on her toes, Mr. Speaker, instead of the heels. Mr. Speaker, that said, I just want to reaffirm, with the contract coming up, will she ensure that members are involved in some type of early discussion, and will she commit to this contract we are going to do healthcare card business differently and more improved? Thank you.
Member from Yellowknife Centre, Minister, Health and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, just to clarify, I think it's the renewals that are up right now for Northwest Territories residents to make sure that they're applying within a couple of months of their healthcare card. I'd have to look into how or who's the procurement of how we do our healthcare cards. But that is all kind of the questions that I have just started to have, because I think it's important that if we're doing this in the Northwest Territories, then we need to be making sure that those cards everybody in our territory has one, maybe having their picture on it, maybe it being their personal identification for flying, all that types of stuff, it would be a good thing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions. Member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions today are for the Minister of Infrastructure. So the Office of the Auditor General, in its audit of the Stanton P3 project, recommended the GNWT publicly report costs related to the Legacy Hospital building leasing arrangement and to provide updates to total project costs when there are significant changes over the 30-year term. Now, the GNWT has disagreed and declined to publicly report those costs. Can the Minister explain who or what the government is protecting by refusing to publicly report these costs? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Yellowknife North. Minister of Finance, or Infrastructure.
Either way, Mr. Speaker, on this one, thank you for the question. Mr. Speaker, this report from the Auditor General, every single other recommendation the GNWT has accepted, it's singularly around the classification of the Legwagoti building as being whether a P3 or not a P3 that we continue to have this issue. If it is a commercial lease, we do not report any of our commercial leases publicly. They are proprietary information to the landlord. Because we have classified this one as a commercial lease, it is proprietary information. It is reported by resident, by constituency, by community, as every other commercial lease is. This one is no different. There's no matter of anyone people being protected, Mr. Speaker, are the same as on every other commercial lease. We don't report them publicly. They are not part of the P3 reporting. They are held separate. But on every other aspect of the audit, we were more than happy to accept the recommendations. And quite frankly, we're already making the changes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure. Member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the Minister is claiming this is a case just like any other commercial lease. Does the GNWT hold any other commercial leases where we actually own the building and we've leased it to someone and then subleased it back from them? Is there any other cases of any other building or any other commercial lease that works that way in the territory? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Yellowknife North. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to my knowledge, this is a unique situation. It was also a unique opportunity, Mr. Speaker. It's not one that was any member of this cabinet was in government at the time. What we had is a building that we owned that needed to be remediated and needed to be remediated at significant cost. This is a large building, a medical building, and the remediation would be significant. So that was included as part of the leasing arrangement. Subsequent to that, and I think this is where there starts to be some challenges, subsequent to that, it was identified that we would in fact need space for long-term care. And so instead, we already had the cost sharing or the agreement, revenue sharing agreement in place. With that revenue sharing agreement in place, Mr. Speaker, we were able to go into the Legwagoti building, go back to the commercial party, negotiate a lease with them. With our revenue sharing agreement in place, we got a better deal as a result of that, and that's the situation we find ourselves in. That's a fairly unique circumstances as compared to any other lease in the Northwest Territories. Thank you.
Minister of Infrastructure. Final supplementary. Member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the Minister has just claimed that subsequent to the lease, we realized, or the government realized, that it needed more space for healthcare services, but in fact it was as early as 2014 that the government had recognized that more space was needed for healthcare services. Can the Minister explain why that was not taken into account when this lease agreement was first arranged with Ventura. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Yellowknife North, Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this again, I'm more than happy to say if we want to admit wrongdoing that, but looking back 10 years ago, we don't have all of the records that we should have in order to explain that decision. None of us were here. I wasn't here. What I can say, Mr. Speaker, to the best of the knowledge today, at the time in 2014, the plan that Health and Social Services had was to build a new and standalone long-term care facility. And then when that project would have been ready to move forward, closer, if I recall correctly, to the 2019-2020, or rather 2020, situation had changed, the markets had changed, commercial realities had changed, and costs had gone up significantly for new builds. And at that time, I believe it was at that time that the decision was made to, in fact, reutilize this building where we already had a revenue sharing agreement rather than going and building new. So, Mr. Speaker, if we want to now, and again, one of the recommendations was to keep better records, agreed, and we'll do that going forward, but in this case, that's the history that brought us here. Thank you.
Minister of Infrastructure. Oral questions. Member from Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these questions are for the Minister of EC&E. Mr. Speaker, I've been speaking with daycare operators. The wage certification grid that the government has brought out is causing difficulties for operators in a time when we're trying to expand daycare spaces. Mr. Speaker, is this new grid something that's been imposed on us by the federal government, or is it our own program? Thank you.
Frame Lake, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the Canada-wide agreement with the GNWT solely dictates that we must have a wage grid, but it doesn't say where that wage grid starts and where it ends. That is solely dictated by our pocketbooks. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Member from Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that clarification. So, Mr. Speaker, daycare operators are telling me that this new system is restrictive and preventing them from hiring staff and helping the department achieve their goal of creating new daycare spaces. Mr. Speaker, will the minister commit to sit down with these operators, work with them, and figure this out, find a solution that works for them, that works for the department, something that can help us move forward? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Frame Lake, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my last, I know which early learning and childcare institution the member is speaking with. My last conversation with the executive director of that institution, I did say anytime you want to have a sit down, I am more than happy. I can also inform the member that there's been 3 separate meetings since last Friday with this particular childcare provider. And I believe there was even one as recently as today, Mr. Speaker. I'm always happy to sit down and have these conversations, but I will also say that we have to ensure that our program falls in line with the federal agreement. And while we stipulate the minimum that people need to be paid, providers are more than welcome to exceed that. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Final supplementary. Member from Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad the minister highlighted that because that dovetails well with the question I was about to ask. Mr. Speaker, operators are telling us that they can't charge fees for additional services like providing healthy meals, extracurricular programming, or even making up the gap between what the government is willing to give and what daycare operators need to be paying in order to keep staff. So again, is that a rule being imposed on us by the feds or the GNWT, and can we change these things that are creating problems for our operators? Mr. Speaker, I just want to remind the minister, if she's well aware, we are trying to increase spaces. We want our operators to be getting the tools that they need to increase spaces to expand. So can the minister commit to working with them to change the things that need to be changed to solve these problems? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
From Frame Lake, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too would like the same things as the member. The stipulation of no additional fees being charged is in the Canada-wide agreement, and any additional fees that are charged must be deducted by the primary fees that are being charged to the parents. So we are in a situation where we need to figure out how to create sustainability and stability within our own system, but ensure that we are, at the end of the day, following that agreement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Education, Culture and Employment. Oral questions. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to follow up on questions raised by the member for Yellowknife North on the Stanton renewal project. The Auditor General maintains that the decision to lease the Legacy building is not good value for money. Plain English. It's an in excess of $70 million that wasn't part of the initial project to a building we own. Does the Minister agree with the Auditor General, and can she tell us today that this was not good value for money as a decision? Thank you.
Good question.
Range Lake, Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General, as I understand, is looking at the two projects as one, and our view continues to be that the two projects are not one. And so the way that we are looking at that value analysis continues to differ, Mr. Speaker, and we do now have a campus-based approach with healthcare, with the two facilities operating side by side, rather than the Stanton Territorial Hospital and what would have then been a separate building built somewhere else at some distance. So at this point, Mr. Speaker, we have two operating facilities, and again, looking at them as the two separate projects, it is our view that they are indeed a good value for money. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Infrastructure. Member from Range Lake.
Mr. Speaker, I guess I'm confused. This seems to be new information. Was there ever a plan that Leigh-Waugontier would not be used, or the Stanton Legacy would not be used as part of a healthcare campus? My understanding is there was always a component of that in the initial RFP that went out for the rebuild, was to demo this building for other uses, and that was something. So was there some other purpose intended for Stanton Legacy before it became the Leigh-Waugontier building? Thank you.
From Range Lake, Minister of Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, when the decision was made to lease it out and to have it remediated by that leaseholder, the intention was that the leaseholder could make whatever choices initially that they wanted about what they would do with that building, likely office space, commercial space, but not bound necessarily to turn it back into any kind of health facility. That would, of course, require the health department to be planning to go back in there, and initially that was not the plan. Thank you.
Minister of Infrastructure. Final supplementary. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know for a fact that the clause or the arrangement with the P3 partner is very specific, that the GNWT gets final say about what goes in there. We had jokes about it not being allowed to be a casino, for example. So the GNWT had a say over it. They could have made it clear that it needs to be health. But I'll say this: can the minister produce any evidence that this is actually saving money, that this, at the time, it is saving money competitively from leases? We've heard as much as 30% savings, but there's no dollar figure. Can she produce a receipt? Thank you.
The member from Range Lake, Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so there's the P3 partner who operates the Stanton Territorial Hospital, and then there is a separate arrangement, commercial arrangement, with a leaseholder over the Leigh-Waugontier building. Again, two different entities that we are speaking about. And what I certainly can look again back to, and I believe was committed at the time, is that some further evidence can be provided, some further information can be provided with respect to the cost differential. So specifically on the Leigh-Waugontier building, at that time, it would have been, at the time that the decision was made to lease back the room and the spaces that were being remediated, given the revenue sharing agreement that was in place, it was better value for dollar than to go out then and build the new building for the long-term care facility. Mr. Speaker, again, we've acknowledged that records back from 2014 and 15 are not as complete as they should be, that record keeping and that decision making wasn't as good as it in terms of records wasn't as good as it should be, and that is the situation we find ourselves in now. We're not going to do that going forward. We have a lot better checks and balances in place. Thank you.
Minister of Infrastructure. Oral questions. Member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm full of compliments today. Here's one to Aurora College. I think I went to their website recently, and I don't know if it's in response to my earlier questions several months ago, or in the sense they were doing it anyway and just decided to do it better. I like what they've done with the timelines and the progress tracker on the work being done for the transition for the Polytech. Mr. Speaker, that being said, not a criticism, just an observation. Mr. Speaker, on its website, it points out that they have a lot of things outstanding, even though it shows it looks like they should have been done or should be in the progress of doing, such as recruitment of marketing communication strategy development, release of Polytech University 5-year academic plan, and the last one is establish a new legislation for Polytechnic University. Mr. Speaker, all of these things look like they should have been started. I'm asking, is this initiative still live, or is there some concerns that we need to know that there are delays that need to come to light to the public? Thank you.
Member from Yonge Centre. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am sure Aurora College staff will be happy to hear the members' compliments in regards to new legislation. That is certainly something that needs to be worked on in the life of this Assembly. And as the member knows, members have received an embargoed copy of the new mandate agreement, which does have an implementation plan in it, and that will be released publicly later this week. Later this week. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Member from Yonge Centre.
Mr. Speaker, maybe to help the minister, the old minister used to say in the fullness of time, which if you were paying attention, that could mean any time. So needless to say, please don't use that for further proof of what's happening. Mr. Speaker, establishment of new legislation for a Polytech University is the cornerstone of where it's going, defines it, and everything then comes out of it. In other words, it's budgets, its plans, its mandate, etc., etc. It needs legislation to be real. Mr. Speaker, on the website it says it'll be released for completion, obviously. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. March 2025. Can the minister update us on this initiative? Thank you.
From Yonge Centre. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that new legislation will not be released in March of 2025. It still needs its GNWT legislation, so it still needs to go through GNWT protocols. Will be tabled in the House here, and then will go to Standing Committee as per our usual protocols. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Final supplementary. Member from Yonge Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and for the record, I appreciate your guidance. Mr. Speaker, my question is, when can members expect this draft legislation to come forward for review? Again, I can't stress enough, nothing can really happen without it, hence we're waiting and want to ensure that the process is moving forward.
Member from Yonge Centre. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when that legislation does take place, it creates much more separation between the government and Aurora College. I can assure the member that work to lead us to that point is still happening. We are still going through the process of accreditation. We're still, Aurora College is still working on its program development, is still working on its policies. They're still very much working towards all of these pieces that will lead to Polytechnic University Act. But there's a lot to be done between now and then, including accreditation and other pieces that go along with it, like their new college funding formula that will also be part of that. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Oral questions. Member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will continue having questions for the Minister of Infrastructure, following up to my last set. So given that the whole point of leasing the Legacy Hospital building to Ventura was to transfer risk to Ventura, has the government been able to recover any of the costs related to the plumbing problems that were encountered just as the building was supposed to open last year? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Yellowknife North. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't have that specific information. I'd be happy to get that for the member and provide it to the House. Thank you.
Minister of Infrastructure. Member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that we are locked into paying $78 million over 30 years to Ventura, can the minister explain whether there is any benefit or value that Ventura is providing to the government over the next 30 years by holding the lease? What are we getting from that arrangement? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Yellowknife North. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the most significant things that we get from that having entered into the revenue, again, sharing agreement with them, it did bring down the overall cost to us of having access to a building that has been fully renovated for use. And when I say renovated, I also want to say remediated. Again, the costs of remediating a building of this size and scale are not insignificant. That would have been a significant cost to the GNWT to do that, to bring it up to a level that would then be actually usable again from the state that it was in. So we are, that is the single biggest asset or benefit that we are getting. And now, as the sort of landlord, if you will, they do have an obligation to maintain the building to a standard. So that's another specialized service that they are providing as a major landlord holder, that they brought it up to scale and are now having to support us. Otherwise, we'd have to bring on likely more public servants and more specialized care in order to maintain the building ourselves. Thank you.
Minister of Infrastructure. Final supplementary. Member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's my understanding that, the remediation work is done, and the GNWT, in fact, had to pay for all of the renovations to get the building ready. So I'm not sure what they're continuing to offer, but is the department investigating the potential and the possible risks and benefits of breaking that 30-year lease agreement with Ventura for the Legacy Hospital building? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yellowknife North. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I do think that's an important point for folks to understand, that there is the remediation of the space, first of all, and there's an industry term for it that's escaping me, but essentially to have it into a shell position so that it could actually be then renovated. So that's where there's two parts to what's going on. The vanilla shell, I think, is the term, to have it at a vanilla shell so that it could be turned into a useful space again. That's not an insignificant cost, and that has now been parsed out over the course of the lease, which again spreads that cost out over time rather than requiring a significant upfront amount. And as for the second question, within the third question, Mr. Speaker, it's not my understanding and not my recollection that we are doing any kind of investigation of breaking that lease. That's not generally the kind of contractual party that we want to be seen in as a government. And so, again, it's certainly not my understanding that there's any intent to do that this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Infrastructure. Oral questions. A member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have some questions for the Minister of Infrastructure as well. So when she says things that the records are not as good as they could have been in 2014, 2015, my archivist heart comes out and I go, oh dear. So fundamentally, that is a huge red flag for someone who understands how the government keeps records. So we have records of disposition authorities within every department, including her department, including back in 2014, 2015, Mr. Speaker. And so my question is, how are we not keeping records that we are bound to by law? Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Great Slave. Minister of Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, it strikes fear into my heart as a lawyer who's under obligations to hold records as well. So I can't answer for what may or may not have happened back in 2014 or 15, Mr. Speaker. What I can answer for is the efforts that we're making today to make sure that we don't find ourselves back in this situation. Not only today, but looking back even a few years now within more recent government, changes to the procurement process, changes to the records management. We have a procurement committee. It might seem like an extra layer, but to not have coordination amongst procurement shared services, infrastructure, and the departments that are being serviced by them makes it far too easy for things to be missed and to not be properly tracked. There's changes in the capital planning process to better provide information about long-term costs associated with a project. There's a single place where procurement now lives, both a dashboard that is publicly available and again within the Office of the Comptroller General, which is our counterpart to the Auditor General's office. Between all of those things and likely more that I've missed in what's supposed to be a short answer, Mr. Speaker, I am satisfied that we've made a lot of change and we'll continue to look for opportunities to do that. Thank you.
Minister of Infrastructure. Member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you know, it's already out it's already out the barn door. You can't close it in the past. I understand that. So what sort of forensic audit did the department do to try and seek out those records? And indeed, how did they cooperate with the OAG? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Great Slave. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the work between, I believe, multiple departments and the Auditor's General Office of Canada went on for, I want to say, 2 years. It might have been slightly longer than that. That's fairly extensive, and I'd be happy to perhaps provide that by way of a written response. I won't do it justice here. The Department of Finance and the Office of the Comptroller General works with the Auditor General's Office of Canada on an annual basis. They prepare all of the audits for our government. So again, I think there was two parts of the question, and I'm thinking I'm missing the second half. But again, in short, Mr. Speaker, happy to commit that we will provide some detail on the extent of the work that went on and the extent of the collaboration we had with the Auditor General's Office. Thank you.
Minister of Infrastructure. Oral questions. Member from Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to continue on the line of questioning and dig a little deeper with the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Mr. Speaker, I had asked about the possibility of daycares charging fees in order to make up the gap. Is there perhaps a loophole that could be found in that daycares would not be charging fees for providing daycare, but simply for charging for extras? Things like providing meals, things like extracurricular activities that I know parents love having for their children. So is there some way that we can find a way around the rules that are being put on us by the feds? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Frame Lake. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, from the agreement that we as provinces and territories have with the federal government for childcare, we aren't allowed to charge additional fees. The piece that keeps coming back out is places can do fundraising. I do understand, though, Mr. Speaker, as a working parent myself who uses different entities to care for my children, that this is very difficult to do. We also know that many sporting institutions do charge fundraising fees if parents aren't able to do fundraising. And so in answer to the member's question, I am currently looking into what loopholes might exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Member from Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that answer. That does, I think, provide somewhat of a path. I mean, fundraising is something that they could be doing in order to do these extra programs, so that's something I can bring back to them as an option, and I hope the Minister, but to get to the next question, Mr. Speaker, if charging fees isn't allowed, I'm looking at what can we do to change this gap, to close this gap as MLAs. I know that my colleagues probably join me in wanting to do what we can for the daycares, do what we can to help them expand, help them operate to the best of their extent. So what does the Minister have any ideas for what we can do on the territorial side to help these operators? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I'm hearing from operators and from members on the floor of this House is that they're looking to pay their staff more. And they're in a situation where they are provided a certain amount from Education, Culture and Employment in order to do that. And Education, Culture and Employment can only cover a certain amount of that based on our budgets. What I can say is the bulk of increases to the early learning and childcare budgets for the Department of Education have been from this program, and even right across the department, Mr. Speaker. And so we, for our current funding, are certainly tapped out. The members did negotiate an additional $3.5 million in our previous budget negotiations, which was a huge help. But what we are continuing to hear is that that is not enough. We know that across the country that jurisdictions are having to put more and more money into this program. Thank you.
Final supplementary. Member from Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, certainly I'm interested in hearing back from the Minister what they need to help make a difference, and I can advocate on this side with my colleagues to see if we can get that done. Mr. Speaker, considering the problems that this new program is causing, and I'm hearing it from many of my constituents, and I'm sure it's happening across the country, can the Minister work with her colleagues in the provinces to advocate to the federal government for better flexibility for implementation of this program, seeing the issues that we've been seeing, knowing that it's not really working working as well as it was intended. Can the minister advocate for changes at the federal level so that we don't have as many roadblocks in front of our operators? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Frame Lake. Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can share with the member that since I started in this role, one of the common things heard at our FTP table is that this agreement or these agreements were signed before record inflation occurred, and that, as I had previously said, jurisdictions are putting more and more money into this program in order to make it work. So that is something that I will certainly continue to share with the federal government at every opportunity that I do get at these tables, what the reality is that we are hearing from our childcare providers. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment. Oral questions. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance has announced that there are new changes to the Indigenous employment or Indigenous recruitment policy, thank you, which replaces the affirmative action policy. We're going to be bringing back P1s essentially and allow Indigenous Northerners to have priority status. Before that wasn't possible because of the Constitution. Has the Constitution changed? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister speak?
Thank you, Member from Range Lake. Minister of Finance.
No, the Constitution hasn't changed, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Minister of Finance. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, then how has the government de-risked this issue? It was unconstitutional before. That was the concern to change the policy. Now the policy remains the same, at least for one class of individuals. Can the minister explain why that decision was made?
Member from Range Lake. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is the issue of residency that creates the risk that we would be concerned with respect to the mobility rights under the Constitution. So Section 6 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms provide that all Canadian residents have mobility rights. And so it is specifically with respect to saying that persons who are living in the North or have lived in the North or have lived here for some period of time, that classification is the concern. But membership in a group that is historically disadvantaged, so this is where Indigenous Canadians and Indigenous Canadians who are Inuit First Nations Métis members, particularly from a group within the Northwest Territories, that group membership can still be one that is under Section 15 of the Charter allowed to have an ameliorative program, in other words, preferential hiring. Thank you.
Minister of Finance. Final supplementary. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the change and support it, just to be clear. But, Mr. Speaker, there are other people of groups that are similarly disadvantaged or similarly of minority status, including people from disabilities. The Disabilities Council has come out and made it clear that they do not think this is a good move to make for the community. So why can we not include other protected minority groups under the Constitution in the affirmative action policy or in the priority action policy? Thank you.
Member from Range Lake. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, agreed. Excellent question and appreciate it, Mr. Speaker. And there will be divergence of views on this. I recognize that. It is an area that when we did engagement over a year and some, 2023 to 2024, it's an area that I frankly found interesting to read and learn more about. There's, again, divergence of view on it. But one of the views that the Department of Finance has here ultimately adopted is that folks who may experience some form of disability don't want to have to self-disclose in order to be able to gain advantage. And so what we would like to be in a position under the diversity and inclusion framework is to say, firstly, that there is an opportunity for recruitment and for staffing officers to positively provide accommodations to someone rather than wait for the person to have to self-identify. And as such, we can create a workplace where people are naturally accommodated from the moment of applying through to their work time, and they can do that through the duty to accommodate and through the diversity and inclusion framework rather than relying on having them have to self-identify to participate in an affirmative action type program. Thank you.
Finance. Oral questions. Member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We found out with great shock there last year that the Northern Bonus Program was cut in the Department of Education. It was embedded into the deepest of the budget details, and I, like many members, didn't realize that it had been done until after the fact. My question for the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment is simply this: what type of analysis had justified that choice to eliminate that program that is very near and dear to many of our returning students here to the Northwest Territories. Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Milne Centre, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as Cabinet, the Financial Management Board, we looked at all programs from, well, not all, sorry, most programs from our departments that were not legislated or afforded through federal funding. And we evaluated what we could redirect because we have a lot of spending happening in our health program, and we know from members on the floor of this House and even from our own constituencies that healthcare is very important to residents of the Northwest Territories, and we desperately wanted to see more funding redirected to that sector. So we went through different funds and we evaluated different programs within our departments and found that the reason that this program was instituted within Education, Culture and Employment was to try and encourage more graduates to return to the Northwest Territories, and it was not increasing the number of graduates that were returning to the Northwest Territories. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Member from Milne Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister said something probably where I was going next at the end of her last answer, which was believing that it did not increase the return. Would the Minister, in a response to my previous question, be willing to table that analysis before the House, in other words, as a return to the oral question or whatever function she wishes to desire, also with the analysis of, is it actually playing out as initially planned? So in other words, have they reviewed and studied the initial decision? Thank you.
Member from Milne Centre, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the member would like me to share with him the number of students that were returning when the program started versus last year, more than happy to do that. As far as reviewing a program that just ended, Mr. Speaker, we haven't really had space or time to see impacts of that. What is occurring here is now students who have repayable loans need to repay those loans, and students who have remissible loans are being asked to stay in the North longer in order to remiss those. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Final supplementary. Member from Milne Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a number of constituents who are quite upset about this. As a matter of fact, I even have a few of her constituents asking, can we bring this back? If the Minister will table this information, I'd appreciate that. If she feels she can only send it to me, well, I'll take that too. Mr. Speaker, I'm asking often when we cut a program, we'll say we'll do an analysis after the fact, like extended health benefits, we heard that promise. Would the Minister be doing any type of 360 analysis after the fact to assess the impacts and choices made by the department? Thank you.
Member from Milne Centre, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Mr. Speaker, I'm more than happy to discuss this with the member if the program isn't there. I would like to understand what the member is looking to understand. If he wants me to table numbers of students who come home after they complete graduation in order to see how those change over time, more than happy to share that information with this House. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Colleagues, our time is up. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member from the Sault Ste.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm requesting, Mr. Speaker, if we can go back to point number 5, recognition of visitors in the gallery on the orders of the day paper. Thank you.
Thank you, member from the Sault Ste. He's asking unanimous consent to go back to orders of the day, point number 5, recognition of visitors in the gallery. Any nays? Seeing no nays. Member from the Sault Ste.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to acknowledge my cousin Wilbert Cook's son, Tyrell Cook Garden, as the page for the Assembly. Welcome to the Assembly. Good to see the young people participating into the hearings. Hear, hear.
Thank you, member from the Sault Ste. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Replies to the Commissioner's address. Replies to the Commissioner's address. Petitions. petitions, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of committee on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document, Government of the Northwest Territories Response to Committee Report 9-20, brackets 1, Report on the Review of Bill 8, an Act to amend the Student Financial Assistance Act. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Table the documents. Member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table a letter I received from the Northwest Territories Family Violence Shelter Network seeking reinstatement of annual building shelter capacity funding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Great Slave. Tabling the documents. Tabling the documents. Notice of motions. Notice of motions. Petition or motions. Motions. Notice of motions. First reading of bills. Notice of motions for first reading of bills. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration Committee of the Whole of bills and other matters. Table document 275-20 brackets 1 with the member from the Decho in the chair.
I now call the Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of the committee? Member for Nunavut-Bootleg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The committee wishes to consider table document 275-20 brackets 1, 2025-2026 main estimates, health and social services. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Does the committee agree? Thank you, committee. We will take a short recess and resume with the first item. Thank you. Please, sir. Committee, I now call the Committee of Whole to order. We have agreed to consider table document 27520(1) main estimates 2025-2026. We will now consider the Department of Health and Social Services. Does the Minister of Health and Social Services wish to bring witnesses into the House?
Yes, I do.
Does the committee agree? Thank you. Sergeant at Arms, please escort the witnesses into the chamber. Would the minister please introduce her witnesses?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To my left is the Deputy Minister, Joanne Chiquero, and to my left, Jeannie, or to my right, my other left, to my right is Jeannie Matheson. What's your title again?
ADM Finance.
ADM Finance.
The committee has agreed to forego general comments. Does the committee agree to proceed to the detail contained in the table document? Committee, we will defer the departmental summary and review the estimates by activity summary, beginning with administrative and support services, starting on page 199 with information items on page 202. Are there any questions? We're on administrative and support services starting on page 199 with information items on page 202. Are there any questions? No further questions? Oh, sorry. Member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm sorry I have a lot of paper here. Please forgive me. So my question is, I think underneath this function is listed information services on page 199. So my question would be to the minister if she can provide a status update on the electronic medical records program, what the timeline for completion is, and I'll stop there and follow up with the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Minister Sumner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe the electronic medical records would be under capital, as it is an infrastructure project, so.
Thank you, Minister. Member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about it more from the business plan perspective, which is where it's listed. So I was wondering if you could just give the House an update on that project, even though it would be, I guess, in capital. Thank you.
Thank you, member from Great Slave. Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I wasn't prepared to speak to that piece, I'm going to just turn it over to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister Chiquero.
No, it'll go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the question. Just for a reminder to folks, the electronic health record is a multi-component to that. There's about 70 components within that initiative in and of itself. What I can say is that over this calendar year for 2025 is the plan for procurement, and our hope is that we are doing the implementation, for example, of the electronic medical record over a phased approach, and we will begin that work in the starting of the calendar of 2026.
Thank you, Deputy Chicado. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yep, just wanted to have that info out in the public as it is a question I get. Thank you. Nothing further.
I didn't see anybody. Range Lake. Member for Range Lake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the changes here seem to be all related to forced growth, $4 million for ratification of the UNW agreement, $3 million for medical travel funding within NTHSSA. So is that kind of an et cetera? Is that an accurate description of the additional spending under this activity? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Sumner?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. Member for H-Link?
Thank you. So when we have things like labor market supplements or anything that falls kind of outside of the collective agreement but represents additional pay or for nursing or incentives for nursing or doctors or any medical professionals, is that this activity as well, would they cover that? Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Range Lake, Minister Sumner?
Yes, that's correct. So anything that's negotiated for the staff is in a collective agreement. If it's in our department, then that's where it would lie. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Range Lake?
Thank you. So is the department, I don't see anything clearly identified along those lines, but is the department considering additional benefits or labor market supplements to support the recruitment and retention efforts within the health authority? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Sumner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, as the negotiations go through the collective agreement bargaining, we follow whatever the agreement is after that, and we cannot bargain additionally outside that collective agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Range Lake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My understanding was during the pandemic in particular, but additional benefit or wage subsidies, the labor market supplement in actual fact were negotiated to help support medical or frontline workers. Is that, and that process occurred outside of the collective agreement? Is that accurate? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the labor market supplement that was negotiated at the time, this current negotiation that there was pieces added as part of that negotiation, and that is now where 17 additional health and social services positions were added to the list of those eligible for labor market supplements, along with the existing nurse practitioner, registered nurse, midwives, licensed practical nurses, and medical laboratory technologists. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Range Lake.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just I'm trying to get at if we're trying to find more ways to support those incentives, because the retention and recruitment numbers are the retention numbers are very poor, and even it seems when we recruit nurses in particular, because there's a dedicated unit to do that, they're out the door as soon as we get them in. So if the department isn't considering additional financial incentives, what is its strategy to work on recruitment and retention? Let's say around nurses, working with the health recruitment unit in finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Ames Lake, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I wanted to also mention as part of that labor market supplements, there were eligible positions that were increased for retention in that labor market supplement. But as for what the department is doing or what within NTHSSA there is the recruitment strategy that the department is working along with, and I can turn that over to the Deputy Minister to go through some of the things that are going on. And I think the thing to be reminded is these are things that cannot be like monetary, so in cash or as the labor market supplement is, and so it's ways to try to enhance making this a better place to come and work. So I'll turn that over to the Deputy Minister if that's okay with you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister of Health. Deputy Minister Chiquero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You may recall that our current recruitment health human resource strategy expired in this last March of 31st in 2024. We are in the process of creating what we call a people strategy. It is due to be delivered for June of 25. This will include strategies, activities related to recruitment and retention. So for example, the health authorities are doing what we call exit and entry surveys. So using that information to be able to inform that strategy. They're completing quarterly reviews of current positions, how those positions are budgeted as an example. They're looking at pieces around providing guidelines for staff, looking at bursary programs, looking at opportunities to bring our youth into health and social services, and then of course looking at enhancing what we would consider to be our attraction and recruitment strategies. You may recall that we had a friends and family travel program, looking to continue that work. We had a referral program whereby folks who in the GNWT referred anybody into our system, looking at encouraging those strategies to continue as well. So those are just a few examples of the items that we will continue to work on to help recruit and also retain our existing workforce.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Chiquero. Member for Ames Lake, you have any? Member.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, has the department consulted with frontline healthcare workers and other frontline healthcare workers, practitioners, on this people strategy that's due this June? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Ames Lake, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, that is correct that there is they are consulting with frontline staff, and and as one of the things that I would encourage, and I would commit to even bringing that back to making sure that that is still that's being carried out. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister of Health. Member for Ames Lake, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, can the minister, I appreciate that commitment from the minister, can the minister share the engagement schedule with me and any other pertinent details around these consultations with staff? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Ames Lake, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I mentioned, I would follow up back with NTHSSA, and I will follow up to see what their engagement is with the staff and how that's taken place. And I have no problem sharing that with members, and I think it's an important piece, like we've heard it many times in the floor of this House, is that our staff need to be heard, and so we'll make sure that there is some kind of documentation on how that is being done, and so we can share that with members. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Health. Any questions? More questions? Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's actually just a question of clarification. I have some questions about the midwifery program. I'm just wondering where we can actually find that on these pages because it's not specifically listed.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake, Minister of Health.
So thank you, Madam Chair. I believe that one position, which is the one that sits within the department, is here because there was a specialist midwifery position that sits within the administrative and support services, and then the others fall under program. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister of Health. Member for Frame Lake, you have a supplementary?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Okay, so considering there's a position here, I might as well just ask the question. I understand that there's a certain amount of reduction being done to this program in this budget, and I'm just looking for some clarification. It looks like there's a $315,000 adjustment. This is something that MLA's fought for hard during the last budget negotiations. So can the Minister just clarify to us and for the public, what exactly is happening here? Is this like are they bringing the cut back, or how can they explain this? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So because the decision and everything happened partway through the year, I think there is the numbers in here. It's more of an accountant thing. The initial reduction was, I believe, around 900,000. And that included 3.75 midwives plus the position, the specialist position in the department, and the position of the territorial manager in NTHSSA. Those two positions were kept or negotiated back and came through a supplementary appropriation. So the money and for the remainder of the positions that are showing that are going down are just, the funding was in the budgets, I think, until this fiscal year, and so this is just the accounting for those positions, those 3.75 positions that were still being removed at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so could the Minister just describe for us and for the public what's being done with midwifery? What is the plan going forward so the public can have some reassurance that the department's still working on developing this program? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the midwifery program is still continuing in Fort Smith and continuing in Hay River. There's been no change to those programs. They still, however, struggle to staff those positions, and the territorial manager and the specialist positions that were negotiated back was to be able to work on how, what is midwifery going to, like coming up with a plan on what midwifery can and look like in the Northwest Territories, and what I guess, and how we roll that out, and how can we roll that out, and what is the cost going to be. So those are the things that those two positions that were put back in to continue to try and to support that work to move forward, in the future. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, my apologies. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to force a habit there. No, I'm okay for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for YK North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is simple. Under active positions, we've got an increase in one extra position in headquarters from 76 to 77. Can the Minister confirm what that extra position is? Is that the Clecho Cultural Coordinator mentioned on the previous page, or is that a different new position?
Thank you. Minister of Health.
It's moving the midwife position back into so that specialist midwife position. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. YK North. Member for YK North.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. My next question is a bit broad, but I'm wondering if the work of the public administrator to review, healthcare, funding and to try to figure out how we can right fund the health system, does that include examination of HSS work? I know that the public administrator has a mandate to oversee the health authority, the NTHSSA, but can they also look at, obviously the health authority interacts with the department, and is there any authority there to make recommendations to the department on what could be done differently or more efficiently within the department? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The PA, as standalone, does not have the authority to look into the department, but the direction to the PA is to work directly with the Deputy Minister. And I think the other piece is to work directly with the Health Sustainability Unit. So within all three of those pieces, moving forward, is how all of them are collaborating together on those specific, to be able to ensure that, that there's no duplication of services, that, where our programs are and the money that we're allocating to those programs and services, within the whole of the health portfolio. I think one cannot work without the other because it's kind of like they're family, so they have to work together. And so that is the direction, and that is part of the mandate to that the PA has to be working alongside those other two areas. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Yellowknife North.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. And so that is good to hear. And can the minister also confirm that the Healthcare System Sustainability Unit also has the mandate to look into what HSS is doing and provide feedback there? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
Yes, Madam Chair. The Health Sustainability Unit is taking, they have to analyze the entire system. And that's where we cannot just analyze pieces of it. And if we continue to analyze pieces of it, then, we don't know how those pieces are working together. So yes, the health sustainability is and the Deputy Minister and her department and the PA have been directed to work, all together, so that way the whole system is being analyzed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Yellowknife North. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is good to hear. It's good to confirm. We've heard that part of the business plans and priorities in this area is reviewing medical travel. First, is that part of the work under this area, administrative and support services, or should I leave questions about the medical travel review till we're actually looking at line items, say within the health authority around medical travel review? Can I just confirm that I can ask questions about the review process with this page that we're reviewing now?
Thank you, Minister of Health.
That would be best to left for the sub-health benefits section. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Yellowknife North.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I will postpone those questions until we're looking at supplementary health benefits. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And next I have Anuvik Bootleg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, my questions are around compensation and benefits, and I could just be confused as possible. But given that we had an increase in our union contract, but looking at this activity and all the activities throughout, I do notice that the main estimates are lower in each case than the revised estimates for 24-25. I'm just wondering if I'm missing anything there, Madam Chair, if there's positions that are no longer there, or if we've gotten rid of positions that were no longer filled, if I can get some kind of an explanation on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
I can passed on to the ADM, Ms. Matheson.
Thank you, Ms. Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the explanation there is that, and just to confirm that yes, throughout all of these activities, there are increases related to the collective agreement because we have staff represented in all of these activities. And so what happened in 24-25, and you'll see there's change from the opening main estimates to the revised main estimates. In the revised main estimates is where, the results of the negotiations are actually shown. For the 24-25 year. And in some cases because we were playing a little bit of catch up and there was some retro that had to be given because of the delay in the negotiations. So that's why in some cases the numbers are higher there. And then they fall back to what the regular increase on an annual basis going forward would be in the 25-26 year. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, ADM Matheson. Member for Bootleg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I did note in some, and we're not to those activities, but I did note in some, it's still the compensation and benefits main estimates for 25-26 are still in some cases lower than they were in 23-24, as well as lower, obviously, than they are in the revised estimates. And that's what's kind of caught my attention as I went through. So just wondering, so then to be clear, I guess, then it was a result of retro pay and for the revised estimates, but was there any positions or unfilled positions that were removed in the department? Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Minister of Health.
I will pass that on to ADM Matheson to try to explain.
Thank you, ADM Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the explanation for that will be different depending on what activity we're in, but in this specific activity, under the line compensation and benefits, so the change where you can see that it's going from 11,616,000 to 12,536, and then down to 12,142. So the reason why it's going down from 11,616 to 12,142 is because we had time-limited funding for a position for the Office of the Public Guardian that is coming out of there, and then it's offset by an increase related to the collective agreement bargaining. So that's then bringing it back up again. So that's the explanation for the change there. So it's the position coming out, the funding for the position coming out, offset by the retroactive or the collective bargaining funding going back in. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Nuvik Bootleg.
Madam Chair, and thank you for that. And yes, and I realize we're on this key activity. I'll hold my questions on compensation and benefits until we get to the other activities, and now I've given them lots of time to prepare that answer as well. Nothing further, Madam Chair.
Thank you. No further questions. Please turn to page 200. Health and Social Services Administrative and Support Services Operations Expenditure Summary. 2025-2026 main estimates, $69,306,000. Does the committee agree? Thank you. Moving on to health and social programs, beginning on page 203 with information items on page 209. Are there any questions? Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just wait for you to restart the clock. Thank you so much. So on page 206, I need new glasses. I have an appointment. The Family Violence Prevention Fund is a contribution that the department makes. I believe, or receives, I should say, I think from wage, but maybe the minister can just confirm.
Thank you. Minister of Health.
I will turn that over to Deputy Minister, or
Deputy Minister Chiquetto.
Thank you. So our budget for family violence is $1.3 million. And that is broken down, and so the piece that actually comes from wage is about $175,000 of that budget, which is really, that has been used to upgrade the crisis lines, for example, that are in the shelters, and the remaining of that funding is coming from GNWT.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Takedo. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So thank you for that explanation. And as the Minister knows, and I think all members in this House know at this point, we do have the NWT Shelter Network asking for reinstatement of some funding, a pretty minimal amount of funding, but maybe the Minister could speak to why that funding is no longer in this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, this funding reduction was done as the shelter networks use this fund. The amount that's allocated that was reduced was for bringing people, from the shelter, like the staff from the shelters into Yellowknife to do training. This past year, my understanding is that the online training has been completed now, and so that those staff within all of the regions now could do the training that this training through virtual means. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister of Health. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'll leave that there for now. I might have a different opinion than the Minister, but we can get into that tomorrow. So could the Minister explain then the breakdown of the Family Violence Prevention Fund, where the 1.1 million goes to? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so family violence prevention, 274,000. National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence, 782,000. And crisis hotlines responding to gender-based violence, 125,000. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can the Minister please explain the 782,000? What does that support? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
Can I pass that on to the Deputy Minister, please? Thank you, Madam.
Deputy Minister Takedo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So 500 of that fund is actually to provide shelter enhancement. 200 is actually to conduct a feasibility study about what are their infrastructure needs and therefore subsequent renovations. And 82,000 of that is to expand the What Will It Take campaign with a focus on specifically to youth. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to change line items for right now on my last 5 minutes here. I note on page 206 there is also mention of wastewater surveillance. The funding from Public Health Agency of Canada has ceased. Can the Minister please speak to how we are funding wastewater surveillance moving forward? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
I can speak. I'll pass that to the Deputy Minister. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Deputy Minister Takedo.
So while you're correct, that funding has ended, and it was specifically around COVID. It is important to note that we are continuing to do wastewater monitoring, for example, respiratory illnesses, and we would need to get back to as to the source of that funding.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and yeah, I would appreciate that breakdown. I just want to highlight it because it is something that's very near and dear to a lot of my constituents. Became very important, obviously, as the Deputy Minister mentioned during COVID, but we also have other novel illnesses or I guess maybe not novel illnesses, but other airborne illnesses that are causing alarm bells in North America right now. So making sure that we have tracking capacity is really paramount to a lot of my constituents. So I'm happy that that's continuing in Yellowknife. Can the Minister please speak to where else testing is occurring currently and if there are any plans for expansion? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add with just further information, and I know that as we're live here, I'm just pulling up more information on the wastewater. There currently is new funding, third-party funding that will be continuing parts, I think, parts of this program ongoing. Where those communities are, I'll just pass it over to the Deputy Minister, and she can speak to the communities that's happening in right now currently. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Deputy Minister Chiquetto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The communities are Betchico, Fort Simpson, Norman Wells, and Yellowknife, which actually collectively make up about 45% of the population. And we don't necessarily have plans at this moment in time to expand that to other communities, and primarily that is also because of the limited funding in this area.
Thank you. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's a little bit concerning to me, considering there are entire regions missing off that list, notably South Slave and the Delta. Is there anything that we can be doing to seek out further pots? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, as you know, I mean, our Chief Public Health Officer, I think, is the lead in this area, and I know that there is lots of work going on within her office on this specifically. But we can bring back the question to what is the issues on why it's only in these, and I know it's restricted to funding, but if there are other things and what the costs might be to expand that, we can find out that information and give that back to committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I believe I might be done for this, so I will cede my time to another member. Thank you.
Thank you. Next I have Anuvik Bootley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I have to ask it now. So I'll start with the compensation and benefits on this side as well. So I note that in 23-24, $14,904,000, $14,690 in the main estimates, $904 in the actuals. Then, as has been explained to me, $16,494 in the revised estimates, likely due to the retro pay. But then I note again, it's down to $14,668 in the main estimates for 2026, which is again a little less than it was in 23-24. Again, I'm just wondering if I'm missing something here, or if there were any positions decreased, or if this is just or positions that were maybe not filled that were no longer budgeted for. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the changes in this line here are because of the sunset of the cost-shared agreements. There are the Northern Wellness Agreement funding. So that with that funding, that because of the timing of the negotiating of that agreement, it wasn't done in time for these mains, but there are increases in those areas. But for this budget, it shows a decrease because of the sunsetting. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member for Bootley.
So no cuts to positions then, and no positions that were vacant that aren't being filled. Can I just get clarity on that?
Thank you. Minister of Health.
Yes, you're correct.
Member for Inuvik Bootleg.
Thank you. I'll just pivot to specialty services, Madam Chair. And I note in the comments what specialty services refer to, and there's a lot of ologies in there that I likely can't pronounce, but that's great. And I note that it says treatment in the end provided in the NWT. So does this mean going from 29 million to 36 million and now to 43 million, that we are now providing more of these specialty services in the territory than we have previously, where we had to pay that through likely through Alberta Care or another province? Is that what we're doing? Are we ramping up all those ologies in the Northwest Territories, Madam Chair? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to get the ADM Matheson to explain that section. Thank you, Madam Chair.
ADM Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The increases there are for physician services within the Northwest Territories, yes. The increases are made up of a couple things. One is because we negotiated a new agreement with the NWTMA for the compensation for the physicians, so there's a big piece there. Another piece is there was forced growth funding that was allocated to physician services to fund all those ologies that have been costing our system for a long time and contributing to deficits, for which we are now allocating dollars and resources to those existing ologies that were already in place. So it's not new ologies, same ologies, just now funding them at the level of service delivery. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Inuvik Bootleg.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm super happy that we have all these ologies that we provide to our residents. I'm not sure if you'd have this number, but can you kind of out of that, it's a fairly significant increase, obviously, to that line item. And you mentioned forced growth, and you mentioned the Medical Association new contract. Does the minister have kind of a breakdown of what kind of made up the majority of that increase? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. ADM Minister Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the majority of the increase was us funding the historical shortfall in the ologies, which is about $6.5 million. There was $1.6 million associated with the ratification of the new contract with the NWT Medical Association, and there was another 1.6, coincidentally, that was tied to the ratification of the collective agreement with the GNWT, because in that line item, in addition to the physicians, there are also the supporting staff in the offices that are, supporting the physicians in those offices. So that's the majority of the increase in that line item. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Inuvik Bootleg.
Chair, and thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that answer. And I'll do one more, and then I'm sure others would like to ask some questions on this. The community clinics and health centres, likely the same answer. I'm not going to assume anything, but likely there was contracts in there. It did go from 88. I note actuals 88 to 93 to now to 114. I hope that this means that our community clinics and health centres are getting more staff and getting more services. But can the minister kind of talk about the increase to 114,930 in the community clinics and health centres, please?
Thank you, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to pass that on to the ADM Matheson.
Thank you, ADM Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, and it's similar rationale. So in this line item, we would have physicians that were impacted by the negotiated contract that were family physicians. We would also have collective agreement increases for staff supporting, the work that happens in the clinics and the health centers through the ratification of the collective agreement with the UNW, as well as we were able to allocate funding for some of those existing services that had been delivered in the health centers and the clinics that were contributing to the historical deficit in the authorities. for a number of years. Specifically, we've added budget in this area to address increases for relocation, for supplies, for accommodations for temporary staff, and yeah, that's the majority of it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Nuvik, member for Nuvik-Bootleg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for those answers, and I'm good for right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Next I have member for the Satu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is on page 206. On the Northern Wellness Initiative, I understand it expires at the end of this fiscal year. Is there any work being done on a renewal? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is, the work is being done, yes, on that new agreement.
Thank you. Member for the Satu.
Masi, I'm glad to hear that. Looking at and being mindful, I'm being mindful of restoring balance and looking at the programs our government through this department is offering. And is it a practice of the department to do a mid-year surplus review? I'll give you an example. After 6 months doing a review, if this program is really not being accessed or delivered, it seems to go on a priority 2 or 3. Is it a practice of the department to take the surplus and move it over to a more important, accessible, oversubscribed program? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is one thing that the health doesn't have is problems with surpluses. So we do not have money to move around. Normally we don't, any money that we do, I have yet I have yet to see any surpluses. Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for the Satu.
Yeah, this is more of a comment, Madam Chair. Yes, I understand the challenges of our government providing health care, particularly to the smaller remote communities. But I'm just curious on the financial practices of surplus reviews from programs. I particularly look at this one here on page 206. Let's see what it is. Healthy Family Program. Actuals came in at 292, and our mains are expected 292. So if it's remaining the same, it tells me, is anybody accessing that program? If not, can we move the funds to a more oversubscribed program? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, that contribution is actually goes to the Clecho government as contribution. Thank you. It's fully subscribed. And it's fully subscribed.
Thank you. Next, I have member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, I have a number of different questions under lots of different items here, so I'm not sure if I'll get through it in 10 minutes, but maybe I'll get a second chance. I wanted to delve into Child and Family Services to start. So it's my understanding from reviewing the annual reports from Child and Family Services that about 25% of CFS staff positions are vacant, and that number is even higher when we're looking at frontline staff. Can the minister comment on whether there's a plan to try to address those vacancies, which appear to be sort of a long-standing chronic problem? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, this year, we're hoping that because of the negotiated contract with the labor market supplement that applies now to child and family service workers, and there's different areas in that. I don't have the collective agreement in front of me to all of the different parts of child and family services, but that would, I would hope that that would help to encourage that. I know that within the department, it is a challenging department, and, and I think that working, many people working in that area, it is a difficult department to work on, so supporting those staff, and I think that's part of the plan, and then supporting with our recruitment and retention is to make sure that we're reaching out to them as well to know within the next, for that plan as to how to support those staff so that they feel, stay in their positions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you. And just quickly following up on that, does the minister happen to know, or is it published, the turnover rates amongst CFS staff? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister of Health and Social Services.
I don't have that detail in front of me, but I do believe that it was in their public annual report in Child and Family Services. So it is a public document. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in the business planning documents, it appears that HSS is promising or working on a new approach to child and family services programming. Can the minister explain what direction that's going, or what exactly we can expect to see from this new approach? Or thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the direction that that the Child and Family Services is going in is it's kind of set in seven priorities to serve children, youth, families. So working collaboratively with Indigenous governments and organizations, care-rooted Indigenous practices, support to care providers and caregivers, strengthen youth supports in transition to adulthood, specialized services closer to home, strengthening human resource recruitment and retention efforts for an inclusive and representative workforce, and reducing administrative demands for increased opportunities to connect with families. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious to know whether there is consideration within this new approach. I know that there is a much more emphasis on family preservation, which is, of course, necessary and long overdue. But my understanding is that family preservation workers are sort of part and parcel working within the same office as caseworkers or those who might be involved in, say, child apprehensions, that kind of thing. And so this might create some fear or barriers in families trying to seek those supports, family preservation, knowing that it's all sort of one office. As part of this new approach, is there any consideration being given to putting a bit more separation between the family preservation work that CFS is putting an increased emphasis on and child protection work? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I really appreciate that question because I think this is something that we had discussed many times in the last government, and I think that is the change that we need to look at is family preservation workers are not a new, they're new in the system that Child and Family Service has, as Indigenous population is predominant in Child and Family Services. There is that distrust, and so I appreciate that the member bringing this forward, but the change that is going on through the system is that the focus is on prevention from the family preservation worker to the child and family service worker. It is to focus on supporting that child with their family and within their communities. I can, with the work that is being done and the trust that needs to be built, that is going to take some time. And I think that what the public needs to know is that the direction of child and family services, even within the new, the legislation that we are currently working on, is to making sure that the residents that need services feel safe when they go into this department, and that they know that they can be supported even when they're at their lowest and most risk. And so that is the mindset change that we need to continue. And I think it's important that our staff are working to support each other, because if we start splitting up our staff, that they're the support networks right now. And so, however, I do appreciate, but I need to know that the public needs to know that this department is to support families. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do hope to continue the conversation with the Minister and in this House about this really important topic, because it does seem like a system that is perpetually, struggling and in crisis, and we're talking about probably the most vulnerable people in our communities, which is children who are experiencing problems in their families. So it also says in the business plan that part of the work in this area is to redesign the foster care and respite services delivery programs. Can the Minister explain what that is intended to do? What's the intention of that redesign? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With that detail, I'll pass it on to the Deputy Minister.
Deputy Minister Chiquero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the examples that I would give is our foster rates. Foster care rates have been the same for many, many years. So one of the ways that we want to be able to redesign this work is to ensure that those families that are supporting our children in care are actually being compensated and providing the necessary resources. So we've recently, those foster care rates were recently increased, and just also working very closely with our partners such as the Foster Family Coalition, and just making sure that those families have the supports that they need. So that's just one example of the way in which we are wanting to redesign and prioritize the foster care system.
Thank you. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thanks, Madam Chair. With the remaining time I have in this segment, I also just wanted to ask about, I think there was a commitment in, I'm not even sure which document it comes from now, but due to the closures of NWT residential treatment centers for children and youth, there were plans to pilot land-based healing youth programs to try to fill some of those gaps, and there was an intention anyway in December 2023 to pilot a cultural wellness camp for youth with complex needs. So, and this sort of bleeds partly into community mental wellness and addictions recovery too, I think, but can the Minister give an update on what programs are ongoing to fill the gap left by the closures of those NWT residential treatment centers for children and youth, and I guess where that shows up in this budget? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there was a pilot that did happen. and planning is underway on how to move forward to post a contract for youth land-based therapeutic programming, including aftercare services. So NTHS is working to propose the reallocation of monies from what was previously trail cross treatment to that. However, that work is ongoing, and you know, we also within social health, child and family services, they do utilize other services. Sometimes they use out of territory services to support families if they have needs immediately, individually and family, that they're supporting. So that is what we have at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Members, we will give members a second chance to ask more questions in this area, but for right now, I have the member for Mafui.
Okay. Thank you. Child and Family Services. Here within the budget, you know, 23-24 was like 4.46. Are we on? I'm on page 205. Okay. So there's an increase from 46 from that time, and then 24-25, and then there was a revised, the budget was revised, the estimate was revised, and then 25-26 went to 52. I don't know if this is good or bad because, you know, Child and Family Services. So is this, okay, so I know that this takes care of the, you know, the all the NWT, and so how much of this is for Child and Family Services program that are for the children care and the support program? I mean, that's a huge increase from 23-24 to current. So it means that the children in care, did it increase as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll have the ADM Matheson break down where that changes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, ADM Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the increase in this area, a lot, you'll hear me say this a lot, is that a lot of the increase in the areas are due to the collective agreement increases that negotiated with the UNW. So there's about $3.6 million of increase that's associated with that. There was also an additional $3 million that were added to fund the delivery of programs that were already existing and to address things such as the increased foster care rates that the Deputy Minister spoke about earlier. So that is new money that's added to the budget to address those pressures as well. And that is those are the two reasons for the increase over last year. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, member for Mafui.
So it was mainly for compensations and benefits within that area. Okay. Okay, thank you. Another one too here, Community Wellness and Addiction Recovery Support Program. You know, we don't have no treatment program, and we do have addiction issues. We have a crisis among our young people, and it's all the communities in the territory are affected, and we all know of someone who is suffering with addictions. So, and then there's Mental Health and Addiction Recovery Fund. There's Mental Health and Addiction Recovery Capacity Building funds. You know, it's good. There's programs, but there's one here, Northern Wellness Initiative. Is that the one that you mentioned that was sunsetted? That's with the federal program? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Health.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. That is, and I think that's in the works right now to be renegotiated. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Mafui.
Okay, yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I know that we do have a lot of mental health issues too in the small communities, we have lots of issues in small communities because we have high rates of unemployment, housing crisis. There's accumulation of all the social issues. It's all, it all goes back to mental health issues. So I just wanted to ask, if they know or if they're working with the Indigenous government or organizations to take on, if they're working with these organizations to take on more of mental health and addiction services in the regions. Are they working with the Indigenous government? I want to ask if they're doing anything to help the Indigenous government or organizations that want to provide mental health services to its people. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, we do provide, community counselors and wellness workers within most regions in the Northwest Territories. But what we also, and I've mentioned this in this House, the direction that has come from Indigenous governments is that they want to have a fund to be able to access funds to be able to provide those types of programs in their own way, in their own regions. And so what we do have is a community wellness and recovery, or wellness and addictions recovery fund. And I know that most of the regions access this, Indigenous governments access this fund. Some of them have multi-year agreements so that they can plan programming. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Mafui.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer. Healthy Choices funds went up from 23-24, and Healthy Family Program stayed the same. Those two are very important for many of our community because I know it's being used a lot. I'm on page 206. So why this Healthy Family Program have not changed? Is it going to continue well into the future, or is there, because it's just stopped at that number, stayed the same from 2023? Didn't move or didn't go down? That is an important program for many of our community, and Healthy Choices Fund as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the Healthy Family Program that's itemized in this section on 206, the 292 that the member is referring to, is a contribution that goes directly to the Clecho government. And then the Healthy Choices Fund is I think it's an application base, and there are 13 applicants that have applied through this fund for, and I can provide that list if you want to committee afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you. Member for Mafui.
Thank you. Thank you for that, for the information. Yes, I have no more other questions on this topic as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, members. And member for Nunavik Bootleg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I move that the Chair rise and report progress.
There's a motion on the floor to report progress. The motion is in order and non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. I will now rise and report progress. Sergeant at Arms, please escort the witnesses out of the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Reports on Committee of the Whole. A member from the Decho.
Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering table documents. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering table document 275-20-1 and would like to report progress. And Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the Committee of the Whole be concurred with.
Seconder. Member from Mophie. She's done a great job today. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passed. Third reading bills, third reading bills. Orders of the day, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Orders of the day for Thursday, February 13th, 2025 at 1:30 p.m. Prayer or reflection, minister statements, member statements, motion 46-20-1. Returns to oral questions. Oral question 475-20-1. Recognition of visitors of the gallery. Replies to the budget address, day 6 of 7. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Replies to the Commissioner's address. Petitions. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of standing and special committees. Tabling of documents. Notice of motions. Notice of motion for first reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration in Committee of the Whole of bills and other matters. Table document 275-20-1 and Bill 12. Report of Committee of the Whole. Third reading of bills. Orders of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. This House stands adjourned until Thursday, February 13th, 2025 at 1:30 p.m.